everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Learn with Medical Library podcast. I'm Rebecca David, Senior Medical Librarian at the Ling School of Medicine. Today, we embark on a journey to explore transformative discoveries in medical research, impactful narratives, as well as influential publications that brought them to light, and the essential role in scientific communication. Joining me in this enlightening discussion is Associate Professor Sanjay Haresh Chotirmall, Vice Dean of Research and Associate Professor in Molecular Medicine at the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine, as well as Provost Chair in Molecular Medicine. His expertise and leadership have paved the way for groundbreaking advancements in medical research. Welcome, Dr. Sanjay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Sanjay. Let's start off our conversation with the first part of today's podcast segment, which is to explore from laboratory to literature and how groundbreaking studies have actually made into impactful publications. Do share with us, Professor Sanjay, how recent transformative discoveries at LKCMedicine have progressed from laboratory research into influential publications.
So first of all, thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me to participate in this podcast. It's a fantastic initiative, and I congratulate you for it.
Welcome, thank you.
I love to talk about the research that happens at LKC because there's so much of it and so much good of it. I think we should start with obviously our budding junior faculty who have in the last couple of years published some outstanding work. I think first let's start with dengue. I think we've made some real good headway in the dengue space in academics. First, a paper from Yo Sin Win and Chia-Po Ying, which has actually repurposed a tool which is used for heart failure and as diagnostics in heart failure to help stratify dengue patients that are admitted to identify which ones will become more severe than others. I think other excellent epidemiological work that's happening is with Lim Tao. Lim Tao studies the Wolbachia national experiment that we're doing to control dengue. As you may be aware, Wolbachia infects the mosquitoes that are the vectors of dengue and in fact suppresses the virus and stops transmission. So that's the scientific way that Wolbachia works, and in fact we've done it nationally, and Tao has published some excellent work which has shown that actually this can be very effective in controlling dengue. And this is going to have impact beyond our shores in countries which are affected by dengue in thinking about this approach to manage their outbreaks. I think other excellent work that's going on is the development of organoid cultures at LKCMedicine. We have brain organoid cultures with Lim Ka Leong. We have kidney organoid cultures with Professor Xia Yun, as well as multiple other aspects of basic cell biology. We were really pleased with the discovery that Tom Carney made using a zebrafish model in order to help us understand developmentally why we all have two limbs, two legs, and he published that work in Nature last year. I think Franklin Zong's work is also something that we should mention, which is fundamental mechanistic discoveries of how bacteria and their toxins influence the response we have to those bacteria and toxins through inflammatory pathway, again published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States. I think some of our more senior faculty have also continued to do excellent work. I think the leadership of John Chambers and the Helios and single SG100K cohort has been a flagship program for our school. There's been some excellent publications that have come out of that, including looking at the food metabolome in Asians and how our Asian diets influence metabolic outcomes and how those will then influence the onset or progression of disease. I think our own dean, Professor Joseph Sung, has recently published an outstanding paper in the prestigious journal Cell, which found a specific bacteria, Streptococcus aeruginosus, as a promoter of gastric tumor formation. And by understanding that, in fact, bacteria and specific organisms can promote tumors, we may be able to go upstream and try to prevent those from happening in the first place by altering microbiomes. So I think that gives you a good snapshot of the breadth and depth of work that's going on at the school at all levels, and we're really excited about the years ahead. Yeah.
That's incredible, Dr. Sanjay. I'm sure the journey was worthwhile, and your leadership in research will continue to steer LKCMedicine as a leading medical school in Singapore. Let's move on to the next segment, which is turning points in research, exploring a practitioner's narrative in scientific breakthroughs and impact on patient care. Dr. Sanjay, do share with us a personal story or an example of a scientific breakthrough that had an impact on science and patients.
Okay, that's a very difficult question. I think there's been lots of amazing breakthroughs in science and in clinical care and in research. But a couple of years ago, before I came back home to Singapore, I was in Ireland, and one of my mentors said to me, "Tomorrow I want you to tell me what you think has been the biggest scientific breakthrough of our times." So I went home that night and really thought about it. Obviously, I was a training doctor at the time. I went to the internet, looked at all kinds of papers, and that question remains to me to today. And the next morning when I showed back up, my response to him was the Human Genome Project. I think the Human Genome Project, published in 2003, has had a fundamental impact on the way we look at society, the way we look at medicine, the way we look at clinical outcomes, the way we look at patients, the way we look at development. And I think that fundamentally has been the one scientific point in time where I think things really changed. I think more recently, the discovery of CRISPR-Cas9 that recently received the Nobel Prize is another major breakthrough that allows you to take that data from the Human Genome Project one step further. We now have laboratory tools where we can edit the genome. And what that does is it opens a billion possibilities in virtually every disease. Diseases that are multifactorial, like cancer and cardiovascular disease. We can understand mechanisms, we can develop diagnostics, and hopefully even adapt it to treatments going forward. This has to be very tightly regulated, but again, the science behind that has been a real breakthrough. I think a more personal story as a respiratory physician scientist, I think something that's revolutionized clinical care in respiratory medicine has been the discovery of non-invasive ventilation. So for those who are less familiar, what traditionally happens is when somebody's lungs are failing with a very bad pneumonia or a very advanced lung disease, we would usually put them in the ICU on a ventilator where they would have a tube down and a machine is helping them breathe. We have lots of patients that require that urgent care, but once you're in ICU, that brings a whole range of complications. And so the discovery of non-invasive ventilation, which is literally a face mask that delivers similar pressures to what we deliver in ICU, but the person remains conscious and avoids the ICU stay, has been a complete revolution. And there's actually many patients are now using non-invasive ventilation at home. And so I think that has probably been the biggest discovery in our own field in advancing patient care.
This is indeed a game changer in medicine, Dr. Sanjay, and thank you so much for sharing with us. Why do you think it's important or essential for researchers to enhance scientific research communications?
So I think that's an excellent question. Patient and public involvement, known internationally as PPI, is an integral part of research. It should be embedded in everything that we do. A mentor once said to me, research exists for patients, not vice versa. And I'll never forget that statement on the ward round, and I say it to colleagues of mine. And that brings us to the point of where and how can patients and the public get involved in our research. We can do great science, but if we can't communicate it, it cannot serve the benefit that it's intended to. So I think scientific communication becomes really important. The way we communicate with our peers, the way we communicate with our patients, and the way we communicate with the public are quite different. So when I returned back home to Singapore many years ago, I soon realized that our patients are very good at taking the advice of doctors, like myself and my colleagues. But I turned it around and I asked the patient the question of, is there something that they would like which we're not providing? And it was interesting because it took some time before patients had the comfort level to give you their opinion, but there was real potential in understanding that. And again, where does that cross-communication play a role in research? In virtually every grant committee internationally, there is patient representatives there. And they really influence the way that funding decisions are made. So I give you again another anecdotal example. There was a committee that I sat on for a very major funding international organization, and there was an excellent proposal about a new therapy for a specific disease. And unanimously, the scientific members on the panel thought the proposal was excellent and should be funded. The patient spoke up, and the patient said, actually, I'm not interested in new drugs. I'm interested in randomized controlled trials that can reduce my burden of treatment. I want to know, out of the 3 drugs that I take every day, how will I be affected if I take 2? There are no trials. There are no studies designed to do that. And that's, I think, an ideal example of a patient perspective and how that will influence the research narrative and the research question. we developed what I call the TARIPH Patient Network. So TARIPH stands for the Academic Respiratory Initiative for Pulmonary Health. And the TARIPH Patient Network started as a small group of patients with lung disease who were sharing lived experiences but influencing our decision-making in terms of research direction. That then grew, and when I took on the role as Vice Dean Research at the medical school, I thought this should permeate throughout our entire research structure and research programs. And so since April of this year, we established the Open Office, which stands for Office of Patient Engagement, that is led by Ms. Ling Devdas, who is an extremely experienced patient advocate and just a wonderful person. And since April, even though it's been in only 3 months, she's already got aspects of patient involvement into our dementia-based research, into our population health research, into our artificial intelligence research, and into our primary care research. So there's some things happening, and we're hoping that we really lead the way nationally in patients being embedded in all our research programs and all our research products.
These are really invaluable, and I believe that the TARIPH Center is an excellent initiative of how we can connect with patient advocates. And in return, our researchers and healthcare professionals have that opportunity to communicate with them better. Our patient advocates now also get a chance to manage their health conditions better as well. To add on to some fun element to our conversation, before we get to the next question, let's play a quick game of true or false. Dr. Sanjay, so I'm going to give you 2 questions, 2 very important questions. And you'll need to think of it and tell me whether it's true or false. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, let's go. So, the first statement, very crucial, very important.
Right.
The discovery of penicillin was accidental. Do you think it's true or false, and why?
Know the answer to this question.
Okay.
Okay, it was Alexander Fleming.
Yes.
At the the St. Mary's Hospital, which is now part of Imperial College London, and penicillin was discovered accidentally because Alexander was thought to be a very careless lab technician.
Right, okay.
And went away on holidays, leaving a petri dish on the table, which was growing a bacteria, Staphylococcus. And when he came back from holidays, he realized that there was a mold growing around the Staphylococcus, which was subsequently identified as penicillium. And penicillium, the mold, produces penicillin naturally, and that inhibited the bacterial growth. So it was found by accident, and thankfully, his careless nature has saved thousands of lives with the discovery of penicillin.
That's correct. And indeed, Fleming's accidental discovery revolutionized medicine. So with that, do visit our medical library, which has got a preserved book display that shows Fleming and his discoveries. The concept of antibiotics was first introduced in the 1900s. True or false?
That's true.
Okay.
I think the first kind of notion of antibiotics was before Fleming in 1910 to 1915, and then Fleming's discovery was 1928.
That's right.
And I think the real era of antibiotics was actually between the 1940s and the 1960s when they were discovered and many came on the scene. So yes, early 1900s was when this started.
Do you think that was because it had anything to do with the medieval times during the 18th or the 19th century,
Quite
where
possibly.
there was a lot of discovery through folk medicine?
Absolutely, quite possibly.
Okay.
Quite possibly. And if we do look back at the penicillin story, it was totally by accident.
Okay.
And again, in fact, penicillin saved so many during those times after the discovery.
Dr. Sanjay, I'm sure our listeners will be very curious to know, are you a fan of libraries?
Oh, I love libraries. In fact, when my daughter, who's now 8, going to turn 9, got her room, the first thing she said to me is, I want a library within it. So it's not just me, it's my immediate family and wider family who have grown up with libraries in mind. I don't just love home libraries, I love libraries at places, right? So the LKC library is a beautiful place. But what strikes me when I think about my growing up days in libraries and sitting among shelves and shelves of books is how things have become digital and how libraries and the spaces within the libraries have changed. We see less and less books because things have moved digital, but there's still a special feeling when you go to the library to read a book. I would encourage our students and our fellow researchers to spend some time each day perhaps reading outside what you're researching in order to learn something new and bring it to enhance the research that you're doing. And I think the library is a great place for that, because just as we go window shopping along Orchard Road or other places in Singapore, actually I love going into the library and just looking at the books that are there, and something will catch your eye and you'll pick it up and have a read of it.
The librarians have done incredible work over the years, from climbing ladders to reach out for books at high shelves, all the way to what you said. Now it's just at the touch of a button through even smartphone apps, where you can reach out through librarians and also read books through Libby under the National Library Board. So there's a lot of great initiatives coming up, and thank you for supporting the libraries.
I think the first one is Every Patient Tells a Story, which is by Lisa Sanders. That book is particularly useful because it really describes how a patient feels when they come to see a doctor. Really what patients want to know is, what's wrong with me? And because patients want to know that, the whole book is about the whole medical mystery around diagnostics and diagnostic reasoning, diagnostic thinking, and how the challenges are from a physician's perspective in not only reaching the diagnosis, but then communicating that with the patient. So I think that is a really exciting book. The second book is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. I read that a while ago, but it's quite a real humanistic story, which it really chronicles the author's journey from a medical student all the way to being a neurosurgeon, and then being diagnosed with an inoperable lung cancer. And what that does is it gives you perspectives of the same individual as a medical student, as a working doctor, as a training specialist, eventually a neurosurgeon focused on the brain, and then being a patient receiving a terminal diagnosis. And at the time, the author was also becoming a new father. So there was even more complexity to that whole journey. And I think the chronicles of that is actually got a lot of lessons for us to learn as people, but as physicians and as patients, and what patients feel like when they receive such diagnoses. Thirdly, which is probably the most recent, which is the autobiography of Margaret Turner Warwick, which is called Living Medicine, Recollections and Reflections. And the reason I've read that recently is I've been honored to be invited to give the annual Margaret Turner Warwick lecture at Imperial College London next week. And so I thought I should read her biography. And actually I learned a lot from that biography. Dame Margaret Turner Warwick was quite an amazing woman, one of two appointed female professors in London in the 1970s, in what was at that time a male-dominated profession. And as a pioneer, she also led and became the first female president of the Royal College of Physicians, reshaped the national health system in the United Kingdom. But throughout the book, again, yes, she was a pioneer, and she had lots of foresight into identifying that patients with the same disease have different patterns. She did this in relation to lung fibrosis, which we now know today and recognize, but she made that clinical observation years before. But most importantly, she talks about the patient, and that if you have not focused on the patient throughout what you do, it doesn't actually matter what research you do or what system you have. It has to be focused on the patient. And I think that that's why I've entitled my lecture next week, Pioneering Patient Precision, because all three words are actually echoed throughout that autobiography. And I would urge our medical students particularly to read that.
Congratulations, Dr. Sanjay, and thank you for recommending wonderful book reads for our LKC community learners as well as our medical students. Perhaps maybe we should collaborate as libraries to start off or revive back our journal club. I'll be so honored to have this under your tribute so that our students, I think our medical students will hugely benefit from this.
Wow, that's great. So I love to speak out to the young people because they are our future and we depend heavily on them. So, I mean, my advice to young researchers and young medical students are actually quite alike. I think you need to stay humble and stay hungry to chase the answers to questions that you're not satisfied with the answer to. There's always ups and downs, And in a journey of medicine and research, there will always be rejections, there will always be times of difficulty, but always stay focused, stay positive, the answer will come, and you keep driven with that. And then finally, I would say never forget the patient in all of this. So always think about the patient, whether you're a researcher or whether you're a medical student or whether you're a doctor. Ultimately, what we're trying to achieve here at the medical school and through each of our work is to actually make the patient's lives better. So always spend that extra moment to listen to what the patient has to say, because they will tell you things that you will not get in any book. In every aspect of our lives, not just research and medical care, but in every aspect of our lives is going to revolutionize the way we do things, change the way medicine is delivered. So I think that's going to be one incredible revolution that we're already seeing. I think with that comes data science and the sheer volume of data that's out there, and how we manage that data and how we interpret it appropriately. Big change or the evolution that we're probably going to see is where climate and the environment becomes very important, not just in research, but in our daily lives and what we do. Finally, I think with the technologies that are so evolving so rapidly, essentially we could ask questions that we could not even start to touch years ago, which now we would have a slate of technologies to answer. And I gave some examples with CRISPR-Cas9 earlier in the podcast.
Would there be a potential for research to then find its way through smartphone applications so that it can reach out to patients faster and more effectively?
In fact, I think that's already happening.
Okay.
So I think that this is why the patient-public involvement piece becomes very important, because we've got to take the fundamental science, the fundamental clinical studies, the clinical trials. We've got to transmit them in patient-friendly language, and we've got to think about diversity and inclusivity.
Yes.
Okay? Not everybody in every country is going to have the same access to the technologies, but everybody should benefit from the research. And so while I think the communication and how we make that communication is important, I think we've also got to think about the diversity and inclusivity of ensuring that everybody benefits from that research and those discoveries. And I think that's the challenge over the next few years.
So thank you so much for joining us in today's podcast chat. Thank you for equally supporting our libraries as well, Dr. Sanjay.
Thank you, Rebecca. And again, congratulations on this excellent initiative.
With that, it's a wrap to episode 3 of the Learn with Medical Library podcast. Do join me for the next episode with a new guest where we explore new interesting topics. Until then, stay tuned and keep a lookout for the next episode. In the meantime, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep growing with the power of libraries.